8 minutes on the clock's field, courtesy of our sponsor Moxfield, and we're going over Anzrag the Quake-Mole, a green, a red, and 2 other for an 8/4 mole god. Says whenever Anzrag the Quake-Mole becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase, and then it also says for 3, 2 red, and 2 green, Anzrag must be blocked each combat this turn if able. That's because if Anzrag's ability triggers when they're blocked, it's going to trigger every single time Anzrag is blocked. There is not a clause on this card that says this only happens once per turn. We want to get Anzrag out onto the battlefield as quickly as possible, preferably with haste, and we want to get down to business. Most definitely, we want Anzrag the Quake-Mole to be indestructible so that every single time Anzrag is blocked, it cannot die. Anzrag kills whatever it hits, hopefully 8/4, come on. Domri, Chaos Bringer in this deck, it upticks to add a mana that's relevant, and if that mana is spent on a creature spell, it gains Riot, which means we can choose to either have it come into the battlefield with haste, or have it come into the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. For the creatures, you can see here, lots of 1 mana drop dorks. I want this creature to get onto the battlefield as quick as moly possible. Look at Crashing Drawbridge. Creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Cheap creatures that are going to fit into our plan here. Goblin and Narcomancers go basically a mana dork. We're just going to reduce the cost of our commander by 1. Hajar's going to make sure it's indestructible. Normal creatures that you would see in a deck like this. Relevant here is Anger, as long as it's in your graveyard and you control a mountain. Creatures you control have haste. General Marhalt is a card that I don't run in any other commander decks, but it's pretty clutch here. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn for each creature blocking it. Helana and Elena, this is such a fantastic way to give our commander haste and give it 2 +1/+1 counters or more if we've happened to grow the partners in some way. Naeth of the Dire Hunt, whenever a creature we control becomes blocked, draw a card. Yeah, there's some other stuff on there, but that's good enough for us. Ogre Battle Driver, giving it haste. We've got Defiler of Vigor, reducing the cost. Carlock, more combat phases. Let's get some redundancy on our commander. Terror of the Peaks operates as another, threat in the air, but also another finisher. Our commander enters the battlefield with 8 power. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if Terror's on the battlefield, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. Yeah, we'll take 8 to any target for sure. Xenagos, always good in a deck like this. Haste provider at its most core. Zalortha, I'm trying in this deck because lethal damage dealt to creatures you control is determined by their power rather than their toughness, so it's gonna make me as a Gruul Mage do a little math, which I hate, but I think having an 8 power commander, the way these words read together seem good. Atali, Primal Storm. We've got so much haste enabler in this deck, Atali just becomes insane. If Atali said haste, it would just be an even more played card than it already is, and it's already really freaking played. Hellkite Courser, good way to skirt commander attacks late in the game if they've answered it a lot. Gains haste until end of turn, that bottom group of techs here on Serac and Goreclaw, and then Atali so that we have a secondary win con. Looking at our sorceries, we've got some ramp. This one's pretty cool. Last Night Together, it's from the Doctor Who stuff. Choose 2 target creatures, untap them, 2 +1/+1 counters on each of them, and then they gain vigilance, indestructible, and haste. We've got power-based draw, and we've got power-based finisher here. Hopefully, if we've got our commander on the battlefield and a bunch of other creatures, Overwhelming Stampede can provide us another type of finisher. Looking at our instant speeds, haste, normal interaction, lots of protection, but specifically protection that provides indestructible. That's what we want to do. Cards like You Look Upon the Terrace. We normally wouldn't run this, but target creature gets +5/+5 and gains indestructible until end of turn, and all creatures your opponents control able to block that creature this turn do so. Wow, forced block. That's another way to build this deck, is kind of a lure strategy so that we can make our opponent block, and that's how we're going to end up winning. Dolmen Gate prevents all combat damage that will be dealt to attacking creatures you control. Yeah, pretty critical here. Indestructible Provider. Jake, I'm running Darksteel Plate in this deck alongside Mithril Coat, strictly better Darksteel Plate. You run both in this deck. You just do. I think that's the right answer here. Also, Hammer of Nazan. Looking at our enchantments, Haste Provider, card draw, Haste Provider, and a reducer of our commander's cost. Plaza of Heroes, I'm putting this into more and more decks, but it does provide indestructible here. War Room, pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity. We only have 2. Pay 3, pay 2 life, draw a card, we'll do it. And then Tyrite Sanctum. I like this as kind of some interesting tech in this deck. Our commander is already a god without indestructible, so pay 4, tap it, sack it, put an indestructible counter on target god. Yeah, that's something we want to do. Let's enable tags on Moxfield, one of my favorite features, and we'll be able to look at the cards by what they do. We've got some good card advantage cards in here. I was talking about War Room's efficacy. Garrick's Uprising, it draws a card when it comes into the battlefield and also gives our commander trample. That's fantastic. Return of the Wild Speaker's good card draw with an 8 power commander that's not a human, by the way. And +3/+3 to non-human creatures. It's another win con if we get there. I love the commander synergy I talked about with General here, but we've just got some good commander synergy cards. Haste enablers, we've got 13 across all card types. We've got enchantments, artifacts, creatures, all of this stuff giving our commander haste. Indestructible, another important keyword to give our commander. We want it to have indestructible, hopefully for 1 mana at instant speed, because we know we're going to need it at some point, or we can just get indestructible on it and get to swinging. We've got some interaction here, pretty basic stuff across the board there. And then our mana ramp, specifically I love Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, 2 mana in any combination of colors to cast creature spells, and it grows as we cast those things. And then Shadow in the Warp I was talking about. This is a fantastic card from 40k I just fell in love with, because it's going to tax our opponents on life just a little bit, and it's going to reduce our creature by 2, which is huge. Protection for our commander, pretty straightforward. And then our secondary busters. Let's get through. Rogue's Passage, 8 damage, can't be blocked. We kind of want to be blocked, but we don't have to be blocked. Then we've got our go wide stuff, and we've got some of our huge haste enablers and multiple combats with Karlach, and then Atali if we're just like, yeah, and today I'm going to win with the Primal Conqueror. Let's take it to a playtest with the last bit of time we've got. This opening hand's a little slower than we would typically go for, but I think that's good. Let's show an example of it going slowly. We drew a card for our first turn and we played Forest. We're going to draw a card on the second turn and play Rootbound. Typically here we'd like to ramp, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. We'll draw a card. We're getting a little bit flooded here, but that's okay, because this turn we're going to play Rhythm of the Wild. We're going to untap everything and we're going to draw a card for turn, play our mountain, play our commander. It's going to enter with haste, it can't be countered, and we can get to work immediately swinging in. With this opening hand, we've got some very interesting opportunities. Spire Garden is going to get our Delighted Halfling onto the battlefield turn 1 after we drew Plaza of Heroes. We draw a card for the turn here, and we get Rishkar's Expertise. We don't yet have enough for our Domri to just fully ramp out, but we can play our Haywire Might, and we can go ahead and play our Llanowar Elves. When we untap and draw, we see an Armed and Dangerous. We are obviously ready to just get Anzrag onto the battlefield. The only other thing you would want with this one is one of those 1 mana spells that give it indestructible. That here would be clutch. Go check out my deck list on Moxfield. And if you got any value from this video at all, hit that subscribe button. It does more than you could possibly know.